Hi there. Welcome to Week 11's class. This video will just be a relatively short introduction. I know that several weeks ago we addressed a variety of critical theories, but this week we're really focusing a little bit more in a more targeted way on critical theory and in particular critical pedagogy. And so the chapters that you're reading reflect that. You will be reading a chapter by Paulo Freire, and I know that Ostry will be leading you all in a class discussion of that piece. You're then going to be reading another article by Michael Apple, and Michael Apple is very well-known critical pedagogue or critical theorist. It's a very interesting article on homeschooling. And then you'll be reading a chapter by Carlson on the bully curriculum. And that one, you'll note when you read that one that Carlson cites both Freire and Apple. And so another researcher who's using those same theories but may apply them in some different ways. I think it is, I guess part of my intention is to help you think about some key constructs and thinkers in critical theory, at least in this, introductory video here, and also just thinking about contextualizing critical pedagogy. And I want to start by doing that in particular by taking a look at this message that was posted by Valerie Kinloch, who is the dean at the University of Pittsburgh School of Education. So I would actually encourage you to pause the presentation so that you can take a minute to read the statement that was put out. It was either late last night or this morning. So assuming you've had the chance to read through that, I know the text is just slightly cut off on the right, but that's not substantial. I think that the events of the last week, has it only been a week? Not just here, but actually globally, really, I think can be contemplated or considered through the lens of critical theory. I think there are also other lenses with which we could look at some of these events, such as the shooting at the Tree of Life synagogue, the mail bombings or attempted bombings of several politicians last week, in addition to the recent election of Bolsonaro in Brazil, recent murder of some African Americans at a store in Kentucky, as well as countless other incidences of hate and other movements globally. In the Apple chapter, you're going to be reading about homeschooling and connections between religion and gender. And I think that when you read the chapter by Carlson that Alex is going to be leading us in a discussion of, I think that you might also notice some connections. So we live in pretty complex times, and for me, the value of critical theory and other theories share aspects of this, and there are other theories that offer things that critical theory doesn't. But to me, one of the values of critical theory and critical pedagogy is really trying to delve into systems and systematic inequities. In many ways, critical theory and critical pedagogy are set fairly firmly within structuralist traditions, but not exclusively. There are some people who build on critical theory to delve into more post-structuralist realms. But again, the critical theory really helps us understand underlying structures and of power. So with that in mind, oh look, some words are up here and others aren't, and I don't know why, but I guess I'll start with those words. So these are some terminology. There are just specific words that you've already encountered in many of your readings, but I thought I would highlight some that are, very frequently arise when you're reading critical theory and critical pedagogy. So I think oppression and emancipatory or emancipation are two, in many ways, I feel like these two terms might bookend some of the other terms, in the sense that critical theory helps us recognize systems of oppression, and the ultimate goal is emancipation or liberation. Critical theory has been critiqued for what has been called emancipatory modernism, and basically it's been critiqued for having a fairly white male Western view regarding who is deemed to be oppressed and who the liberators get to be. And it assumes that, like, if I'm going into a location and I say, oh gosh, these people are oppressed, right? Who am I to say that they're oppressed, right? And who am I to say that they just need to come to consciousness and be liberated or emancipated? And so there's some critique of power relations within critical pedagogy, but these are still very, very common terms within the field when we're talking about critical theory and critical pedagogy. The term subaltern is, oh look, another word. The term subaltern is one that you'll encounter in readings for this week. I think it occurs in Michael Apple's art, chapter in particular, but it really means sort of not subversive, but sort of non-dominant, sort of existing under the radar or outside of hegemonic structures. So that's what subaltern refers to. Structure is in there because structure is really an unpacking and critiquing social structures is a pretty major focus of critical theories and critical pedagogies. So in other words, not just taking structures and social structures as taken for granted, but unpacking the power relationships that govern them and that sustain them. And that has to do with the term hegemony. So critical theorists will often refer to hegemonic structures, right? Or hegemonic systems of oppression. So really hegemony is really getting at the notion of power and power relations. Oh, look. Apparently I have some animations in here. Isn't that fun? Look, there goes that one. Oh, there's a new one, Praxis. So the way I like to think of Praxis is really the intersections between theory and practice. So critically reflective pedagogy and classroom practices that are very much explicitly theoretically driven and informed by theory. There's sort of a mutual relationship between theory and practice when we're talking about praxis. And I think that underlies a lot of Paulo Freire's work and the work of other critical theorists. Let's see if others pop up. Oh, dialogue, yeah. I think dialogue and dialogic classroom spaces is a pretty major concept within critical pedagogy. And you're going to see this, I mean, this is not only in Paulo Freire's work, but you're also going to see this in a video that we're going to watch a little bit later in this week's class of Peter Mcclaren, who's a well-known critical theorist. And he really talks about how dialogue is essential. And he actually talks about, wait for it, dialoguing with terrorists. And you can't see me right now, but I'm doing air quotes. So when I'm doing that because he means dialoguing with terrorists or people who have been labeled as such, that in order to get beyond current oppressive structures and oppressive realities, we absolutely have to dialogue with the other. And I think that his ideas are very provocative, so I'll be interested once we get there to know what you think about that video. Oh, I love this word, which I can't say. I'm going to try anyway. conscientiousao, conscientiousao, maybe. It's Brazilian. It's Portuguese for conscientiousization, which is really just means a process of coming to consciousness. And that's a word that I believe you're going to be encountering in Paulo Freire's work. The Brazilian, he was Brazilian, that's why I keep saying that. The Portuguese term conscientiousao has been taken up and is fairly well recognized within the field of critical theory and critical pedagogy, but it's perfectly fine to use the English word, which is also hard to say, conscientiousization, something like that. But really it means coming to consciousness and coming to critical consciousness. And so what that means in the context of education is becoming aware of hegemonic structures and power relationships and oppression, right? Oppressive forces. And the idea is that conscientiousization is necessary for emancipation. And dialogue is also necessary for that. One of the interesting things that I think is important to keep in mind about critical pedagogy and Paulo Freire's work in particular is that for Paulo Freire, it wasn't just about emancipating the oppressed. It's also about emancipating the oppressor, that the oppressor and those who are in positions of power are also sort of locked into hegemonic structures and ways of being. And so processes of emancipation are not just for those in power or oppressed, but also for those in power. In other words, the idea that we need to emancipate ourselves from inequitable structures and hegemonic power relations. So I think that's all of the terminology. So I think we're going to move on to another page here. No, we're going to animate them. Okay, here we go. All right, key concepts and figures. So what I would like you to do at this point, and you can actually do this, you can either pause the presentation and do this, or you can do it after I'm done with the presentation, although this is the last slide. But you're going to find on the main landing ReggieNet page for this week's class, right underneath this introductory video, you're going to find a link to a website produced by our friends at Wikipedia, crowdsourced encyclopedia that it is. And you're going to find a link to a Wikipedia page about critical pedagogy. And I would like you to go and read that web page. Read the whole page because it's just chock full of information to really help you wrap your brain around critical pedagogy, where it came from, as well as who some of the usual suspects within critical pedagogy are. Paulo Freire is one, and so is Michael Apple. They are not listed here, but these are some other names of people that you can explore. So when you see links for them within the Wikipedia page, go and explore a little bit about who they are. Some of these names may be familiar to you, and some may not. Peter Mcclaren, you're actually going to be, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, you're going to be watching a YouTube video of him talking, so you'll get a sense for him. I have to say, Donaldo Macedo has written with Paulo Freire, and he gave the keynote address at the Association for Teacher Educators conference a couple of years ago, and I got to introduce him, and I got a selfie taken with him. That was a pretty exciting moment for me in my career. So that was pretty neat. And Gloria Ladson Billings is well known for her work in culturally relevant pedagogy. We're going to be talking about her work in culturally relevant pedagogy, as well as culturally sustaining pedagogy and reality pedagogy in the coming weeks. You may have heard of Bell Hooks. She is well known, not just critical theorist, but also well known in the area of Black feminism. Jonathan Kozol has done a lot of work with curriculum and equity as well. So go and explore a little bit about those folks. And that's going to give you just further background for their readings and engagements this week. And, you know, if you're considering for one of your papers, your third or fourth paper, you could explore one of them and read and learn about them as a curriculum theorist. I think one thing that I wanted to emphasize that I think we may have discussed earlier this semester, but quite honestly, I don't recall for sure. And I think it's a really important point of misunderstanding when people are talking about critical pedagogies, and that is understanding the difference between critical thinking and critical literacy. Honestly, I could have said critical literacy, critical pedagogy, or critical theory. I say critical literacy because that's really a foundation of Freire's work. And in classrooms, we often, you know, when we talk about critical pedagogy, that's often what the teacher is doing in the classroom. Critical theory is a broader umbrella. Critical literacy is really something we're hoping that our students will take on, right? As well as critical thinking. So a little bit about the difference here. When we're thinking about critical thinking, really what we're talking about is having a healthy skepticism of texts and sources and things like that. So when we're asking students to think critically about issues, we're asking them to look at all sides of an issue, to think about what an alternative perspective might be, to really ask, how do we know? And you know, let's say if you're teaching, you know, media literacy and looking up information on the internet, for example, you want your students to be able to evaluate the veracity and reliability or trustworthiness of sources. So it's having a healthy skepticism toward things. And that's actually essential for critical literacy, critical pedagogy, critical theory, but it's not enough. It's not the full ball of wax when we're talking about critical theory, pedagogy, and literacy. So while we need to be able to think critically about sources and about where information is coming from and have a healthy skepticism and think about multiple viewpoints, when we're getting into the realm of critical literacy and approaches to curriculum grounded in that or grounded in critical pedagogy, we're taking that a step further to have that skepticism and to really critique systems and systems of oppression and inequity and power structures. So in addition, the goal is not just to have that skepticism and to critique those, but to actually work toward transformation, social transformation, to work for social justice and to work for equity. So there is a point of action and social action in critical pedagogy and critical literacy that goes beyond what critical thinking does. If you are interested in any of the extension activities for this week, you have 2 videos of classroom practices that are linked. And the very first one, I think it's short, and it's a really good short teaching channel video that I included to help you think about, you know, to what extent that video represents critical thinking or critical literacy, critical pedagogy, or perhaps a bit of both. If you're sort of interested in pursuing the differences between critical thinking and critical literacy more, I would encourage you to watch that and keep some of this in mind. But again, it's that taking action. It's the not just being skeptical and questioning systems, texts, authors, power, what have you, but actually taking steps to make the world or the community a better place. And that actually brings me back to that statement earlier on in this video of from the Dean of the College of Education at University of Pittsburgh. And so much of what she emphasized in there was care and love and And that's a part of critical literacy and critical pedagogy too. In fact, that whole notion of teaching with care and teaching with love is an aspect of Bell Hook's work. So if you're interested in that in particular, you could explore her. So I'm going to end this now. The next thing I want you to do, if you haven't already read the readings, go ahead and do that. And go to the Wikipedia page and explore those theorists. And then after that, I would like you to watch the Peter Mcclaren video. That is going to set the stage for your engagements or classroom discussions. Again, Alex will have one prepared for you. Ostry has one prepared for you, and I've got one prepared for you on the Michael Apple reading, in which I'll be asking you to think about the Peter Mcclaren video, another video that's on the Michael Apple subpage, as well as the chapter by Michael Apple. So, oh, I almost forgot one thing. You probably saw this in ReggieNet, but in case you didn't, part of what you're going to be doing for this week's class is a 5-minute Flipgrid video where you're going to update us on your curriculum project. So when you're going to make your video, and I would also like you to go in and watch a few other people's and comment on them so that people are getting some feedback as well. So anyway, that's it for now. Enjoy this week's class, and as always, reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns.